I've always loved Christmas. Okay, I know that everybody loves Christmas. That's a really dumb thing for me to have said. It'd be the same thing as me saying I love breathing, because just everybody loves that, right? I mean, it's part of what we are as people. But Christmas has always been a special time for me, and it's almost like Christmas just brings out a whole other side of me that wasn't there beforehand. See, I'm not usually one for doing a lot of stuff to my house on the outside to decorate it or anything like that. I'm just not a seasonal decorations kind of guy. But at Christmas time, man, I love hanging lights. I love getting my yard looking like it's all festive in Christmas. One day I kind of hope that my house will be visible from space with my Christmas lights. That'd be fantastic. I'm not usually the one to do interior decorations either. I kind of like my house to look one way and just one way only and call that good enough. But man, when it comes to Christmas time, I like my house to look like it's the stinking North Pole. I want it to be so festive, and like once you walk into my house, you just know it must be Christmas. Like that's what I want. And when it comes to traveling or going places and stuff like that, I'm kind of a homebody. I don't like to go a lot of different places, especially needless trips, but man, at Christmas time, I love going around and looking at all the lights and the decorations and going to those different displays that they have at things like the zoo and the parks. And I'm looking forward this year to going to the Greentown Fairgrounds for that display. It's going to be awesome. I love that sort of stuff. Christmas just kind of brings out the child that's in me, and that child is never really all that far anyway, so it's not a really long journey for that kid to come back out. But it's just something about this season just brings that back to me. And when I was a kid, whenever it came to this time of the year, after Thanksgiving had finished and everything's all decorated and everybody's getting ready for Christmas, this was always it's a special time, but it's also a frustrating time as a kid. Because it seemed like once we got those decorations up and we were getting all excited and hyped up for Christmas, it kind of felt like the clock started to get a little slower. And as the days kept coming towards Christmas, it's like the days kept getting longer and longer. And once you finally got on Christmas break from school, it was almost excruciating how long you had to wait. And man, as a kid, you just felt like, is it ever going to come? You get that frustration that builds up. I did everything I could to try to occupy my mind, to try to get myself to maybe not think about it so much. I'd do things like, drawings or work on puzzles. I'm not a big puzzle guy, but at Christmas I usually do at least one. I'd watch a Christmas movie in the hopes that maybe it would speed the clock along, and then when I'd finish doing whatever it was I was doing at that time, I'd look at the clock, and to my horror, it hadn't moved nearly as fast as I'd hoped it did. And so it just kind of brings out that frustration as I was waiting for Christmas to come, almost feeling like it was never going to happen. As a father now, it's kind of fun to watch my children deal with that. I love Christmas anyway. I loved Christmas as a kid, but man, it may just be a little bit better as a dad. Watching as my children get that excitement and that anticipation just continues to crescendo its way up, and seeing that same frustration that I had as a kid played out in their eyes, it's kind of fun. I'm not going to lie. Getting the house all decorated with them. We have a family tradition that we did this past Friday. I love it. We always, the day after Thanksgiving, we decorate our house for Christmas. We spend the whole day doing it. And then that night before bedtime for the girls, we drink hot cocoa and watch Charlie Brown Christmas. And I love it. And it kind of gets them excited. It gets them in the right mindset. But it also begins that waiting for them. It builds and it builds to the point that they are starting to wonder if Christmas is ever actually going to come or not. I've got a Christmas countdown on my phone that actually can tell you not just the days until Christmas, but the hours and the minutes and even the seconds. And the girls love to go and say, "Dad, can we look at the Christmas countdown?" They'll do it 2 or 3 times a day, sometimes more. And then they'll get upset when they see that the days hasn't changed on that countdown. Because it almost begins to feel like it's just never going to happen. Something about Christmas is that way for all of us. It's kind of one of those things that every one of us gets excited for Christmas, no matter what age we are. At least most of us get excited for Christmas. We get excited, that anticipation begins to build, and we have to wait. And that's the most frustrating part of it. It's getting to the point now where folks are so excited for getting ready for Christmas that they're decorating earlier and earlier and earlier for Christmas. And I'm going to be honest with you, it seems a little counterproductive in my mind, because all you're doing is hurrying up to wait some more. Think about it. So it's just, we love this Christmas season, but we have that waiting, we have that anticipation. It makes it kind of difficult at times to keep waiting. Because we're not really good at waiting anyway. None of us in this room are any good at waiting. We don't wait for our food. We don't like waiting for our Amazon deliveries. We don't like waiting for anything. We are an instant gratification culture. We want things to happen right now, and we want it to be right this second. So the idea of waiting for Christmas is borderline excruciating. I mean, we know that patience is a virtue, but who wants that? But more than that, sometimes waiting can be discouraging. It can be discouraging for us to have to wait. It can be hard to wait for things that we've asked for or things that we've paid for. And in this context, in this setting, it can be hard to wait things that we've prayed for. We know that God's timing and our timing are completely different things, and that oftentimes God's going to make us wait for whatever it is. But when you're in that heart of it, when you're in the heart of waiting for God to move, for God to answer prayer, oh, it's hard. It can be so difficult to go to God day after day, month after month, even year after year, only to see nothing happening. The situation is not getting better for you financially. The cancer is continuing to spread. They won't stop drinking. Or even, they won't come back at all. It's discouraging. It's disheartening. And it's difficult to spend a lot of your time waiting for God to do something to intervene. And maybe hardest of all for us, it can begin to cause us to struggle in our faith. It can cause us to begin to ask some questions that we're not overly comfortable with. It can cause us to start to think some thoughts that maybe we've never thought before. All of us wrestle with this at some point in time in our lives. I'm convinced of that. If you've never wrestled with it before, it's probably coming. We deal with this sort of thing, and let's be honest, Christmas sometimes can only highlight how hard it feels to wait on God. While everybody around us is celebrating the birth of the Son of God, we're sitting there wondering, where is God? Why isn't God doing this? Why isn't this happening for us? Christmas might be a time of discouragement for many of us because we've been waiting for God to move like a child waiting for Christmas morning, beginning to wonder if it's ever going to happen. It can shake and even cause us to lose our faith. It's so hard for us to maintain that faith. It's understandable to lose that, or to at least lose a part of it, when you've prayed and asked God and, let's be honest, sometimes demanded of God, and still see nothing happening. The only answer to your prayer is heartbreak, until eventually your heart calluses over. I'm willing to bet that Zechariah and Elizabeth probably felt a little bit of that. They probably understood that heartbreak of waiting for God to do something over and over and over again, only to be met with no response or nothing happening. We first meet Zechariah and Elizabeth in Luke chapter 1. So if you got a Bible, if you want to turn there, or a Bible app, if you want to open it up to Luke chapter 1, we're going to be there today. We're going to kind of camp out here for a little while, but it's interesting when we first meet Zechariah and Elizabeth, whenever they first kind of come into the story, just a few verses into this book. When we first meet them, Luke gives us three things that we need to know about them. We're not really given a ton of backstory on them. We're really told just about three things about who these people are before we're invested more into their narrative. It starts in verse 5. It says, "In the days of King Herod of Judea, there was a priest of Abijah's division named Zechariah. His wife was from the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. Both were righteous in God's sight, living without blame according to all the commands and requirements of the Lord. But they had no children because Elizabeth could not conceive, and both of them were well along in years. Like I said, right away, we're given three different things about this couple. We're told three different things about Zechariah and Elizabeth. The first thing that we're told is that Zechariah is a priest. Now he's been called by God to do this stuff. It's a pretty heavy calling, really, because as a priest, you have to do all kinds of things. Everything that you do revolves around your service to the Lord. I mean, really, that should be the case for everybody, but for priests, it was kind of doubly so. More was expected out of priests than anyone else. It was their responsibility to take care of the spiritual needs of their community. If people had a question about God, you went to the priest. If you needed help with a sacrifice, you went to your priest. If you needed to confess, you went to your priest. So Zechariah's entire life revolved around his service to God. And the second thing that Luke tells us about both Zechariah and Elizabeth is that they're pretty good at serving God. It says that they're righteous, that they're without blame. Like that's pretty great. Like, have you ever seen people in your life who just seems like following God is easy for them? I mean, I've met people like that in my life. It's kind of annoying sometimes, isn't it? Everything they do just seems to be a perfect and flawless way to follow God. But really, we're not seeing the other side of it, where we're not seeing the hardship that they have to deal with. But Zechariah and Elizabeth, they are completely and utterly blameless. They've done nothing at all wrong. They've followed God earnestly and done everything right. And that makes verse 7 a little hard to swallow. Because the third thing that Luke tells us is that they have no children. That Elizabeth has not been able to conceive. There's a lot of pain in verse 7. You can get the impression from Luke here that if he's going to mention this, it's probably not by choice. I mean, there are people in our society who decide not to have kids, but we don't point that out. But Luke pointing out that Elizabeth doesn't have a child yet, he's telling us that it wasn't her decision. You can kind of get this picture of Zechariah and Elizabeth when they first get married, and they're daydreaming about the way their lives are going to go, and they're picturing the pitter-patter of little feet running around the house, hearing those joyous laughter and wonderment that comes with children. They think about all the days that they're going to have with these kids and all the love that they're going to feel for them and the love that they have for each other being manifested in the creation of this new life. And yet, it doesn't happen. They pray and they come to God every single day, asking God for one thing: God, please, give us a child. But when a month rolls around, still no sign. That's okay. Every month brings with it new hope. They think maybe this one's the one. Maybe this time it's going to happen. Maybe this time God's going to answer our prayer. But it doesn't. Months turn into years. Years turn into decades. And nothing. That hope that they felt every month that maybe this was going to be the one, that started to wane. That started to fade as every time that they've asked of God to make this happen, God, for one reason or another, has chosen not to. They continue to pray, they continue to ask God, but those prayers are getting a little less earnest every day. And finally, one day they realize it's just not going to happen. We're too old. The kids their friends have all had have now got kids of their own. For whatever reason, this opportunity for God to fill their arms and fill their hearts has been passed over. And yeah, the verse there in Luke tells us that they still continue to follow God hard, but you got to you got to be willing to bet that there's a difficulty to that. That it's hard to keep following this God who, no matter how much they've prayed for it, He's just not going to let it happen. Until one day they've decided, and it had to be a tough decision, to just give up, to let that go, to try to cling to whatever faith that they have left. They'd feel that sting of their prayers going unanswered forever. It was customary that once a year, the priests of the nation of Israel were divided up into different divisions. Divided into divisions? Yeah, okay. And it was customary that once a year they would have to take a couple of weeks, each division, and they would go into Jerusalem to serve in the actual temple of God. They served in their synagogues in their local vicinities. They made sure that those were taken care of. But once a year, for 2 weeks, they would have to go into Jerusalem to go and serve in the house of God. And so what that meant was for Zechariah, he's going to take a couple of weeks and he's going to be away from his wife. He's going to be away from his family because he's going to be deep into the service of God. This was kind of a routine thing that had to happen every year. And there were certain responsibilities that the priest would be given, kind of like a chore list, if you will. And one of those responsibilities was that one of the priests would have to go and burn incense around the sanctuary and pray certain prayers and do certain things to kind of cleanse the sanctuary of any unrighteousness, because the house of God cannot be unrighteous. And I got to be honest, whenever Luke tells us about this particular act happening for Zechariah, I love the way that he words it. All right, we see the way that he words it in verse 9. It says, it happened that he being Zechariah, was chosen by Lot. I don't know about you, but when I read this particular line, I kind of envision as Luke trying to be a little cute here. Like, well, it just so happened to be that this character I've talked about for the last several verses, it was his turn to be in the sanctuary. Okay, just me, cool. But Zechariah is alone in the sanctuary of God. He is burning this incense around it. He is saying these prayers, reciting these different incantations he's supposed to do to kind of keep the temple cleansed. But do you know that feeling? I'm guessing you probably do. That feeling where you believe that you're alone in a room, but then you kind of get the sense of, I'm no longer alone. I don't know about you, for me it always happens when I'm doing something moderately embarrassing, like talking to myself or singing way off key, like a song that I have no business to sing with a high falsetto, and I try, and that's when I realize that somebody else is in the church with me. Somebody else is in the room. Zechariah felt that. All of a sudden, as Zechariah is in the sanctuary, believing himself to be alone, he feels a presence near him. And when he looks, standing right in front of him is an angel. Now, the anxiety that you and I may feel in that moment, that fear that all of a sudden comes on it when we realize that we are not alone in a room, that's bad enough. But for Zechariah, it's an angel. It's a bright, shiny guy. And I got to be honest with you, I love the way the angel starts, because almost every single narrative that involves an angel appearing to somebody always starts the same way. And we see it in verse 12. It says, do not be afraid. Yeah, that sort of thing happens all the time. An angel always just miraculously pops up in the room with me. What's there to be scared of? But the angel goes on to say, your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son. You will name him John. There will be joy and delight for you, and many will rejoice at his birth, for he will be great in the sight of the Lord. He will never drink wine or beer. He will be filled with the Holy Spirit while he's still in the mother's womb. He will turn many of the children of Israel to the Lord their God, and he will go before them in spirit and power of Elijah, to turn hearts of fathers to their children and the disobedient to the understanding of the righteous, to make ready for the Lord a prepared people. This is quite a moment. Don't you think? Can you picture where Zechariah is at in this particular moment as he's serving in this temple, as he's believed himself to be alone in this room, only to all of a sudden see an angel standing before him, and this angel comes bearing a message with him. And I got to be honest with you, I love the way the angel starts. He doesn't start by immediately saying, you're going to have a kid, he starts by giving Zechariah some comfort because he tells him, your prayers have been heard. I don't know about you. I'd like to hear that one time. To just hear from a representative of God himself that your prayers have been heard. Sometimes that's enough, isn't it? It's enough to bring comfort to us in any situation just to know that we've been heard, that we've been noticed, that somebody sees us, that we're not being ignored. And this angel goes on to tell him, your prayers have been heard, and God's going to give you what you've been asking for. Your wife is going to have a baby boy. And not only does he do that, he gives Zechariah like a whole idea of who this kid is going to be, right? Like he tells him he's going to be great in the sight of God. He's going to do all kinds of amazing and righteous things. He's going to lead people back to their God. This is an amazing spoiler warning about what's going on in the life of his kid. I don't know about you as a parent. I'd love to have some idea of what my kids are going to be like when they're adults. To wonder if the heartache that we feel or the frustration that we feel, or let's be honest, sometimes the anger that we feel, they're not here today, it's fine. To know that it's worth it. That in the end, they're going to do great things. And you would think as a priest, man, Zechariah is going to take great comfort in this notion of knowing that his son, like his father, is going to spend his life in service to God. What an amazing, amazing vision of who his child is going to be. But there's something in this message that Zechariah he can't wrap his mind around it. He can't get past one particular thing. Zechariah asked the angel of what I consider to be a fairly important question in verse 18. He says, how can this be? Zechariah asked the angel, for I am an old man. My wife is well along in years. It'd be easy for us to look at this particular question and kind of wonder how Zechariah could possibly doubt this situation. I mean, we're removed from this, right? Like we're not a part of this. We're reading a story that happened 2,000 years ago. And so we can't understand how could this guy who's in this book that we've read of God doing amazing things, how could he question that God is going to make this happen? But I got to be honest with you, the more I've thought about it, the more I've come to think this is probably the most genuinely honest response ever. Again, Zechariah and Elizabeth have prayed for this for so long. They've gone years of asking for God to do something to make this dream of theirs a reality, only to be disappointed time after time after time. And now, biologically, this is not supposed to happen. So why would God choose now? Why would God wait until we're old to make this happen? Why wouldn't he do this while we're young, while we still have that stamina and that strength to endure toddlerhood? And yet God chose now. And so Zechariah he wrestles with this. He struggles with this. Yeah, he's a priest. He knows the stories of Sarah and Hannah and other people in Scripture who weren't supposed to have children but miraculously were able to. But it's one thing to read or hear or learn about what God has done for somebody else. It's a whole other thing to be on the receiving end of it. It's a whole other thing to see that prayer answered. So it's perfectly understandable that Zechariah would have some trouble with this particular proclamation. See, Zechariah is a man whose faith has been shaken. It's been hard. He's wrestled with this. I'm willing to bet that each one of us in this room who've experienced the same pain, the same anguish of unanswered prayer, we could probably understand where Zechariah is coming from. We'd probably even respond the same way. We've prayed and we've asked God and we've gone to Him all the time. We've tried to be as patient as we can be, and yet it seems like nothing's happening. That no progress has been made. It's easy in times like that to have our faith shaken. It's easy for us to have that time of discouragement, to feel that disheartening. It's hard to have faith when you're still waiting for God. But isn't that what Christmas really is? It's the promise of God fulfilled, even when it seemed like that promise was never going to come to pass. There's a lot of time between Genesis chapter 3 and Matthew chapter 1. Generations of Israelites, righteous men and women of God, prayed earnestly to see God's Messiah, to see Him come, to set things right, to make their relationship with God more genuine. People who, frankly, are probably better suited to have been able to see it than you and I. People like Moses, David, Elijah, Jeremiah, Isaiah, who probably talked more about Him than anybody else. Men and women of God who prayed day after day, let me see your Messiah. To only go their entire lives without that prayer being answered. Who lived with that unanswered prayer longer than anybody else could possibly imagine. Now, as His followers, we hope for, we pray for His return. I don't know about you, but lately I've been praying a lot more for it. Yet as we look at the world around us, it's getting harder to wait. It's getting harder to hope that this is going to happen. It's getting harder to maintain that faith that one day it will take place. But as we look throughout Scripture, especially as we look at the story of Zechariah and Elizabeth, that seems to be when God thrives. Like, I'm not saying this is not one of those end times prophetic sermons. I'm not that guy. I have no idea when Jesus is coming back. And I tend to not trust anybody who says that they do. It'd be awesome if He did, right now. But what I'm saying is, even if we're holding on to hope, and our grip is getting weaker, as we continue to wrestle with unanswered prayers, we continue to wrestle with whatever the situation may be that we're looking for God to resolve, and it seems like He's not, even if we're just barely holding on to hope, holding on to faith, I think that's enough to see God do awesome things. To see God do amazing things in the world around us. I believe that it's oftentimes whenever we are starting to give up that God is going to make it happen, that's when God decides to move. Or at least that's been my experience. I don't know about yours. I wish I could stand up here right now and say that everything is going to work out the way it's supposed to, that you're going to be able to see your prayer come answered, but I don't know that. All I can do is offer encouragement. Keep praying. Hold on to that faith as tight as you possibly can. And I believe that God hears our prayers. He knows what our heart longs for. He knows what it is that we want. I don't know why it feels like he hasn't answered our prayers just now, but I'm sure he's got a reason. He knows your heart. He hears your prayer. Have faith. Everything ended up happening just like the angel told Zechariah it would. I do find it funny that Zechariah was told he wouldn't be able to speak until it all happened, which, again, for a priest, it's got to be difficult. I get nervous if I ever get a tickle in my throat, like, what if I can't talk? That's what I do. And yet, it happened exactly the way that they'd hoped for. Elizabeth became pregnant. In verse 25, as she realizes that this impossible dream, this thing that she's prayed for years, has finally come to pass, she says this. She says, "The Lord has done this for me. He has looked with favor in these days to take away my disgrace among the people." That is the sound of faith proved. That is the sound of someone whose unanswered prayer is finally answered. Again, I'd love to tell you that whatever it is that you've prayed and prayed and prayed for will happen, but I don't know that. All I can tell you is that God hears you, that he loves you, that he cares for you. I believe that one day we will see with our eyes our ultimate faith made sight. Today, we're going to light the first candle of Advent, the candle of faith. It serves as a reminder of the faith that so many people had before Jesus was born. The faith that one day they would see him, to see that faith renewed. And it also symbolizes our faith that one day he will come again.